Researchers at Virginia Tech, which is located in my district, like my friend Dr. Yoon, have carried out research to analyze and separate rare earth elements in coal and in gob piles or coal waste. How can state and federal coordination incentivize the identification of other sources of waste that may also contain critical minerals?
Thank you for the question. There's been a significant amount of research and development and project work done specifically on coal tailings and the ability to extract. I think looking at the broader aperture of waste streams and applying a similar level of rigor is certainly merited on the research and development front. But I'd say at the same time, there's a need to move forward with what is most immediately deployable and scalable, and has a pathway to being economically competitive. But that innovation has to be a core part of the solution set at scale, as I mentioned in my statement. So continued research and development on extractive methodologies for a broader aperture makes sense.
And I guess as a follow-up, are there particular industries or operations that lenders and venture capitals are hesitant to invest in because of a lack of regulatory consistency?
Yes, as I mentioned, when there's uncertainty with regards to timelines, the regulatory pathways, it's much more challenging to underwrite a given project if there's a track record of uncertainties, delays, stops and starts. So really the only point I'm making is that one consideration would be a prioritized regulatory pathway with clearly established timelines, requirements up front, so it's clear to the market, clear to the counterparty executing the project what that is.
Oftentimes, if I'm understanding you, that's what we call shot clocks on certain things, to say that you've got to say yes or no by a certain time so that people know what's going on, or say you didn't give us enough information and reset the so-called shot clock.
And I know it's been a focus of both Congress and the administration, applying Fast 41 towards critical projects, considering strategic materials projects as a classification to be bucketed and allocated towards priority regulatory pathways like that makes a lot of sense to me, because there's the scope, scale, complexity of the gaps resident within this broad complex of strategic materials is significant and vast, and there's got to be a way to, I had an experience from COVID response when I was running the DPA program. We need to, with leadership and urgency and resourcing, we can attack this problem, and private capital will deploy at scale if some of the barriers are removed.
Or reduced, right. Mr. Gubkin, in your written testimony, you suggested adding used lithium-ion batteries and battery materials intended to be recycled to the list of materials excluded from the definition of solid waste. Why do you believe excluding these materials would address your concerns with how battery recycling is regulated?
So currently, with recycling, the way that things are, as I said, there's two pathways, basically, that we're forced to go. Either you go through a RCRA Part A-B permitting process, which can take somewhere around 2 years to complete. If you want to make any modifications, you're looking at several months more for any modifications, for those to be approved and incorporated into your permit. If you're an innovator, if you're a startup, this is not really helpful. The other path, as I'd said, was you wind up categorizing materials as universal waste, again, calling them a waste, but there's a weird spot within these regulations that say you have your destination facility where you process, and you can't keep the materials that you want to process on that property. You have to store them somewhere else. And that, again, does not make sense. And from an environment and safety perspective, it doesn't make sense, as well as a logistics perspective. You now have to handle the material more, move it again, put it on a public road, load it, unload it. It's ridiculous, quite frankly. And I don't see the reason for why it's there. By contrast, if you go and exclude these materials, recognize them as material feedstocks similar to other materials, like I mentioned before, shredded circuit boards, very analogous, and say, these are important. EPA has recognized the importance of these and said if these are recycled, they're not waste. You don't have to deal with either of those frameworks, so you're able to move forward. You still have to prove that you're legitimately recycling. So you don't lose anything from environmental protection.